Data everywhere, nor any time to think. Well, if Samuel Taylor Coleridge was to rewrite the rhyme of the ancient mariner for the modern era, my guess is the mariner's curse would be to sail a sea of useless data, perhaps penance for his crime of using ChatGPT to prepare his company tax returns. Because dodgy data is a curse, and also the topic of today's episode. Hey there, and welcome to the AI Forecast. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present, and the future of data and AI in the enterprise every week. And if you haven't already, you want to make sure to like, share, and subscribe because we really do appreciate the support that it brings us. And speaking of support, I can't forget to give a huge thank you to the show sponsor, Cloudera, for bringing this podcast to life. So as I mentioned, today we're going to dig into a topic we've mentioned in passing on previous episodes, and that being the importance of clean, reliable, trustworthy data, or as I sometimes like to refer to it, fantasy. Because it does seem like something we're always talking about, and it seems to be that we're forever cursed to struggle with this issue of dodgy data. But good data is absolutely foundational to the quality and the outcomes we want to get from AI and automation. So what can we do to improve the quality of data without sending companies bankrupt on a Sisyphean task of cleaning it all the time? Well, to help unpack the topic, I'm joined by Chief Innovation Officer for Data Intelligence and AI at Nasuni, Jim Liddle. Jim's a prolific writer and speaker on the topics of data, storage, AI, and cloud, and brings a perspective that's informed by his time as a CEO, a role where good data matters most. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks. Looking forward to it.
Likewise. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in London.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll bring us a distinctly British perspective on good data. I'm looking forward to it. Before we jump into it, we do a little thing to begin with we call a lightning round or the Furious Four. Call it what you will, but it's another way of getting to know you. You ready to play the game?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Brilliant. All right. If I was at a British pub and I bumped into one of your mates and I said, what's Jim Liddle's superpower? What would people say that is?
Oh, I think they'd say I was a chameleon, actually. I'm very good at adapting to different situations. So I think that's probably what they would say about me. And I've been a bit like that in my career too, because I can code. I've been an architect. I've worked in both sales and management roles. So I kind of understand how the tech stuff goes together with the business stuff. So yeah, they'd probably say he's a chameleon, that guy.
Or a Renaissance man, if you were to use a fancy term for it. I like that. Excellent. All right. Well, next up, what do you think is the most impactful technology of all time?
I think that would probably have to be electricity. I think a lot of people would probably say the internet, and certainly in my lifetime, it's probably been the internet, but probably electricity. It enabled mass industrialization. It probably provides the means for all the technology we have today. And it's one of these things we don't even think about anymore because it's so ubiquitous.
Now, we talk about, what AI is going to do for business and how AI is going to disrupt jobs and all of those sorts of things on this show. But what I'd like to hear about is, what would you like to see AI automate for you personally in your future, Jim?
I think I would like to see AI better automate our understanding and ability to deal with climate change and help countries redact their carbon footprint. And my sense is unless that stuff is controlled and automated, it's never going to happen. And hopefully at some point in the future, AI can be a facilitator for that.
A noble answer. And last but not least, and it's really a topic I think we're going to get into today anyway, some of us, many of us, are effective in our careers because we've got hacks or best practices, things we've learned about working with data that have helped us be more effective. What are some of the tips or tricks or hacks that you've learned as someone who works with data?
Don't ignore data curation. I think it's easily ignored, and it's key when working, with data. I've done a lot of work in the past with search, pre-AI with the old keyword search, and I think the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, still very much applies. Treat metadata as data, don't ignore it. Classification, metadata, it's really important for data lineage, data governance, AI pipelines, so many things. Don't ignore scale with data. Throwing 100 terabytes or 1 petabyte into a RAG pipeline is never going to give you qualitative results. And probably the last thing I would say is not every data problem is an AI problem.
I think that's that last bit's going to be an interesting one to touch on. Well, I do appreciate it. Let's get into the topic because it's a perfect segue, really. But before we do, for those listening who aren't familiar with your background, tell us a bit about Jim.
I've been in the industry now over 30 years. I guess from a data point of view, I really got into that in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was working with a business rules and business process company over in the States. Very much topical, given problems we were trying to solve at the time, which was how do you automate business processes with business rules? And if you think about agentic today, it's kind of the same thing all over again, except it's not static business rules, it's autonomous agents that actually can make decisions instead of hitting dead ends. I moved on from there to work with another big data startup over in Israel. And actually, coming out of that process, I formed my own company, and that's the company. It was called Storage Made Easy. Essentially, what it did is it took disparate storage systems and put them together in a kind of unified file system, and then allowed you to have business processes on top of that, along with AI, across the entirety of the data estate. And that's the company that Nasuni bought, that I ended up becoming the kind of the CIO for AI and data intelligence for Nasuni.
As I said, that I'm sure informed your relationship with data when it went from being something that you talked about for others to something you were consuming personally to make decisions. Now, when we talk about the hacks associated with and best practices and learnings about dealing with data, which is a question we ask every guest, what's been interesting to me is if you look at the show's history longitudinally over the last 30-something episodes, is a very frequent answer or very frequent range of answers, I should say. Things like triangulation, lineage, as you just said, data quality. They're all common answers. They sound so important and everyone's talking about it, but you also get the sense that maybe people will talk about it as an aspirational thing rather than as a practical thing. So I guess my first question is, are issues around data quality something that are aspirational? Is it overlooked? Is it something that's just put in the too hard basket, along with exercise more, eat better, and all of those things that we talk about doing one day? What are your thoughts on data quality? Why is it such a perennial discussion point for both business people and data professionals?
I think in my career, it's always been something to be achieved by the companies that I work with, and often not achieved. If you go back a few years pre-AI and all of the governance legislation came in, things like GDPR and CCPA, along with obviously HIPAA, there was a lot of aspiration around data governance, data quality, metadata classification, so that firms could understand where they had PHI and PII. And I think it was aspirational then, and I think to a certain extent for a lot of companies, it's still aspirational today. The problem tends to be the amount of data that companies have. The fact that we see, especially since COVID, the amount of data is kind of not only doubling, but kind of quadrupling, year on year. And it's hard to get a grip on that data. It becomes dark very quickly. It kind of gets buried in a corner. It doesn't get a spotlight shone up on it. And if anything that AI has done, to be honest, it is to shine a much brighter spotlight on it and say to companies, really, if you really want this data to become an asset for you, then you have to solve the data quality, data governance problem. Because if you don't, actually, it's not going to do a lot for you with AI.
This might be controversial now, so feel free to argue with me. And in fact, I'm sure the audience would love it. I know personally in my own experience as an executive and working for other executives that I can get great data that I feel quite confident with. Mm-hmm. But invariably, for the stuff that's really important, like not the trivial stuff, I'm talking the stuff that gives you insight or an edge, I find I need to spend a lot of time cleaning it and massaging it and frankly using a lot of judgment about, hey, I'm getting an answer that doesn't seem correct by my experience or gut, which usually tells me that I need to go back and work on a lineage problem or a pollution problem that's occurred. And often that's a result of an IT system that's being used in a certain way to work around a business process problem. I mean, this is my experience. Is it just me?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think part of the problem with data, particularly in the enterprise, is it's fragmented in most cases. If I look at a lot of the companies that I deal with, when they have a data set, and it doesn't really matter what the vertical is, that process you just talked about going through, to capture the data set, essentially, to get value from it. In big companies, that data set's normally split over different locations because different teams have worked on part of it. And half the problem is, and you described it being in different applications, half the problem is bringing the data back together in a single cohesive place that actually you can start to apply it to a pipeline or do what you need to do to massage it to get it into the state you need it to be, whether that's with AI or some other kind of ML process. So I don't think your experience is unusual, actually. I think it's typical.
I've seen this. I go back to many years ago, the idea of when data warehousing was a thing, there was your big ELT projects. So, your transformation and cleansing and normalization projects. One of the reactions to this challenge of it being a problem is almost over rotation. It goes from getting no attention to let's just run a data cleansing and data normalization process. I almost get the sense when I look at these projects, and I might be insulting people when I say this, that the data professionals' response is, okay, if we could just freeze the business as it is, give us a year and a half to work on fixing the problem, and then you can start doing stuff again. And invariably, it almost seems, as I say, Sisyphean. It's like you wind up chasing your tail because, of course, the business doesn't sit still. The data professionals are trying to hit a moving target and the problem perpetuates. What are your thoughts on that statement?
I think that's true. I think, what you just described is very much the structured data experience where you're taking a lot of structured data sets and you're trying to go through kind of an ETL process and get it into some sort of data warehouse. And I think companies have got very good at that over time because a lot of the technologies, like Spark and Hadoop and what have you, they've gained an understanding of how to tackle that process. Even though, as you say, that process still has pain points. The problem with unstructured data is not as well understood. It tends to have never been managed to date properly. By the nature of it being unstructured, it means that it's not easily understood in some of those pipelines. And not only that, it changes, it's operational data. So unstructured data is getting created every single day. Now, I know what structured data is as well, but unstructured data is kind of hitting the enterprise from all sorts of different places. Not only these days, from people working in offices, but like devices, tablets, sensors, even sometimes. And I think the problem with that is it is less well understood and there is less business processes around it.
And there's so much of it too, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah.
The volume dwarfs structured row and column business data.
It does. And if you, I know one of the Gartner stats is, and it's something like this, it might be a little bit off, but they say something like if you haven't touched the data within 60 or 90 days, it goes dark and you might never touch it again. It kind of just disappears because it's being replaced by new data every single day. And then it invariably ends up in some file system somewhere. And you end up in this crazy situation where nobody touches it, but nobody wants to delete it because nobody has any visibility into it.
Yeah, and this is one of those interesting situations where, of course, part of the problem is going to be AI. In other words, if you were to feed this data into your AI platforms and you haven't gone through the process of trying to understand it properly, you may wind up with results you're not expecting. But equally, one of the best ways to classify a lot of that unstructured data, oddly enough, is to point an AI at it. What are your thoughts on how you deal with that contradiction?
I think that is quite true. I think the first thing you need to do with your data sets when you've got unstructured data sets is kind of map them out and know where they are, first of all. And then, obviously, if the context is split, in an ideal world, you would join that up so that you've got kind of a unified unstructured namespace. And then what you'd need to do, as you say, is you need to get some visibility into it. Now, there is a number of obviously different ways you can get visibility into that data. Classic way of getting visibility into the data is to index it. So indexing gives you a lot of information about the data. And it's not only indexing, of course, the metadata, it's indexing the content in many cases as well. Now, it's probably worth pointing out that the index is working against textual data. And I know a lot of companies are generating data that is still unstructured, but not necessarily textual. And I'm thinking of things like, Revit files, AutoCAD files, Adobe files, where they've got proprietary kind of schemas. But even if we stick with textual data, you'll get a lot out of an index. And some of these indexes today are pretty smart in terms of they can at least give a first pass on doing some classification against the content, and they can even figure out lineage and versioning. So it gives you a first pass to get some visibility into the data, to get some, if you like, some light classification, to get some light lineage. And at that point, actually, a lot of these indexes now can actually allow you to give semantic indexes on top of that once you've done the initial BM25 index, which then allows you to start to, potentially at least interact with some of the data sets. Now, that might be not the entire data set. Maybe you're going to hive some of that off from some of that light classification that's being done. But you can see, where you started from, which is actually, to be able to even understand the data, we have to kind of go through a process, a light process with kind of indexing in AI to get to the point of understanding which data we actually want to really use with AI.
All right, so let's talk then about how this, I guess there's two elements here: management support for this process, and there's the architectural and technical support for the process. So let's start with the technical first, and we'll wrap up talking about the management. And I must have management on the mind because I said ELT, Executive Leadership Team, not ETL, Expect, Transform, and Load. So I'm clearly thinking too much. You can tell I've got a board meeting coming up. Let's start with the technical architecture, because this is a fast-moving space. We talked about data going dark. Invariably, there are a lot of people storing, what I'd call dead data or underutilized data assets on rotating and or solid-state media. That sounds trivial until you realize you've got to pay for supporting it, pay for providing the electricity for it. You've got to back it up, and it's a problem that tends to scale radically. So let's talk about the technical side of things first. As you say, you're a chameleon. You live on both sides of the house. Let's take the CIO perspective. How should companies rethink their storage architectures to make sure it's useful and scalable, and also economically scalable, I should point out?
The problem that a lot of companies have today is that predominantly their storage infrastructure was built for people. It wasn't built for AI. Because it was built for people, it tends to be co-located where people are, and it tended to be physical on-premise storage. And it wasn't connected to other physical on-premise storage in other locations. And invariably, probably like me in your career, at some point, you'd have gone through that awful process of trying to sync location A to location B for a particular data set. So, more than one, group can work on it in a kind of the same time, or at least the next day. And I think that's a big problem. I think that data foundation is a big problem. Economically, it's not great having on-prem storage in that way. It's not that scalable, particularly when you kind of have to react fast with new data coming in. And economically, you don't get a chance to take advantage of some of those kind of storage architectures and costs that you have on cloud. And it's not great for AI because the context is split. You don't have a kind of a single unstructured file namespace, if you like. So one of the things that I believe, companies should look at, particularly if they're really thinking about having a long-term AI strategy, is to fix their data foundation. And when I say fix their data foundation, what I would say is you need to unify the data so that it doesn't matter if you're in location A or location D, you can still get access to any of the data in the namespace. And it doesn't matter if you're on cloud, you can still plug it into an AI system and it can get access to all the data in the unified namespace. So that's one thing, unified file namespace across the enterprise. The second thing is that's great. And if you're a cloud-first company, that's great. But ultimately, you still have to run your business. And if you're going to run your business, you don't want the latency of data coming down from cloud to your local office, because it doesn't work for local applications. It doesn't work for people. And actually, it doesn't work really where data has gravity and needs to be, at a certain place at a certain time and instantly available. Best solution for that is hybrid. Hybrid means that most of the data is stored on cloud, but on the edge, you have the data cached where it's needed, intelligently cached, based on algorithms, patterns, usage. And it's only a very small amount of the data because, as we said earlier, most people are working with 60 days worth of data or less. So it's a very small proportion of the data compared to what you have stored. And actually, when you've finished with the data on the edge, you want it to transparently move back into that namespace. That shouldn't be some sort of project or process. Also, if you're using these edges, you probably want data that's been written on one edge to be available on other edges in semi-real time, because again, we've got this, non-AI problem, which is we want to work on similar data sets in similar places because we want to divide and conquer some of the tasks. Those might be ML tasks, for example. They could be AI tasks where you're actually doing some work on the edge, with some AI process. So that's another thing you want. And I would say underpinning all of that, you want resilience by design. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to try and back up what's on the edge or back up, what's in the cloud. You just want resilience. And the best way to get resilience in the old world was snapshots. And I think it's still the best way to get resilience in the new world. The only thing is you want those snapshots to be immutable. Why do you want them to be immutable? Because, if you get a threat actor, whether that's a ransomware threat actor or whether that increasingly might be a rogue agent, you want to know that you can actually make sure that all they can really do is write something new so that you can easily move back in time and recover the prior copy without having to go through some sort of delta backup time window to try and do that recovery. And you want all of that to be your data foundation. And it may sound like a lot, but obviously there are hybrid cloud architectures that actually are built to do these things today. And they happen to be, one of the most predominant architectures really for running your business as you need to do. Even with AI, that's still 80, 90% of what, the normal bread and butter, what people do. But also it's really fit for AI because if you need to run processes on the edge against SLMs, you can. If you need to, run, processes against some of that unified data set on cloud, on the hyperscalers through some of the larger foundational models, you can. And you kind of know that as this data is being worked on, this operational data day by day, it's just coalescing and moving back into the namespace.
All right. Well, I wanted to you mentioned data gravity there. That was a brilliant answer, by the way. You mentioned data gravity with the introduction of a lot of hype and refocus on high performance compute that occurred with the introduction of AI and ML. There has been a lot of talk that architecturally, or even favoring on-prem, and there's been a commercial impetus to that as well. I've heard horror stories of people getting ridiculously large cloud provider bills for data in motion as they're, shoveling terabytes of data around the planet. Are you personally seeing a bias back towards on-prem, or what's your take on the way the boardrooms are talking about this?
I'm not really, actually. It's an interesting topic, and we could probably spend a lot of time on this. But I think that most of the companies that I work with, they're not doing model training. They're not. They're mostly doing inference and RAG, and retrieval augmented generation. Retrieval augmented generation, in the last 12 months just gone, has probably been the predominant way to use your company data with foundational models. Whether that is you building out, some of your own RAG pieces, or whether that's using kind of democratized RAG with like Amazon Q and Copilot. And none of those really need massive GPUs, etc., to do that. Obviously, if you're doing fine tuning or you're doing training, then that's where you kind of need to start thinking about underlying infrastructure at scale. But I have to say, I don't see a lot of that. It's a very low percentile of companies who are doing that. And it mostly is because it fits well within what they want to do within their business and what they do, their business releases as a product. Even talking to some of the hyperscalers, they tell me that, less than 5% of the customer set is actually doing, large scale training and fine tuning. And maybe that's back to what you talked about. Maybe it's cost, even to do a small subset of, training a model on cloud is mid 7 figures. So it's not a trivial exercise. And apart from the cost, of course, you need the skill sets to be able to carry it off.
All right. Well, let's talk a bit about, let's shift to the boardroom and I guess case studies about experiences. So with AI in particular, I think it's tempting to sort of take a fire ready aim approach, right? It's like you get a lot of pressure from the board or your product managers, people looking at their competitors is going, we need to get something out there quickly, just do something. Your counseling, if I understand correctly, is a bit more of a methodical approach. Get your data house in order first, and you're going to get better long-run results from AI. Do you want to talk to examples where you've seen organizations achieve better success by investing in data before they started deploying AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think that without obviously going into specifics on particular customers, I'd say a lot of the customers that we deal with at Nasuni are enterprise customers. So invariably, multi-location, lots of people, lots of data, anywhere from several hundred, terabytes through to multi-petabytes, and they kind of, understand the value of their data today. It's gone from being a cost to potentially being an asset that they can leverage. And but they do understand, of course, that in most cases it's dark and they don't have a good handle on it. They hit the problem quite quickly of split context or fragmented data. And I guess a lot of what I talk to companies about is trying to understand what their strategic AI vision is, and educating them. Not always, because often they've hit the problem, they understand that it is a real problem. Thinking about what the operational kind of building blocks are to get to a point to implement their strategic AI vision. And yet, many companies can go away and build an internal employee chatbot or an external sales chatbot that's maybe hooked into a system or an Excel spreadsheet to be able to answer questions. But if you want to, leverage your data as an asset across the business, across the locations, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that you have to be able to solve the data problem. It doesn't really matter what the vertical is, even whether that's like AEC projects or companies doing media campaigns or energy companies who have subsurface data across several locations. They all end up realizing that actually, to give AI the context it needs to get the best qualitative answers, then the data has to be cohesive and joined up. Because if it's not, they're just going to end up with some sort of integration project to get the data joined up. And actually, after that, they get back to the problem you talked about earlier, which is that's today's problem. What about the data since we started the project that's piled up?
Inevitably. It really is. I describe it as Sisyphean because it does feel like you are just constantly trying to roll a rock up a hill. Yeah. Look, and not to depress people, it's just the nature of we're trying to, as somebody once remarked, we're trying to change the wings on a plane while it's still in flight. It's a intrinsically difficult problem. Hey, you've got the term innovation in your title, which is always a dangerous one. Mm. AI has got to be one of the most disruptive, and I mean intellectually disruptive, technologies we've seen in a while in terms of prompting us to rethink everything. I've often said that AI projects are not a failure of technology so much as they are a failure of imagination, as but either over imagination or being underplaying or maybe perhaps protective of the status quo and not being aggressive enough with them. Just curious, what are you seeing? What's exciting you at the moment about how AI and data are coming together in terms of innovations or maybe even early stage thought processes you're seeing in enterprise customers? Just curious.
You touched upon something that I talk a lot about with customers, not directly related to your question, but at the very beginning, which is the different way you need to think about interacting with AI systems. And I often talk to customers about critical thinking, which is a little different to context engineering. If you think of context engineering in terms of, what the tech guy needs to do to make sure that everything's, stuffed right into the context for the AI, and however they end up doing that. Critical thinking is really about how you can interact with the AI in a way that gives you the best answer ultimately. And a good example of that would be something like, I don't know, if you were going to ask about building a new product feature and you said something like, tell me the best product feature to build for this product. You'd get an answer, but it wouldn't be the same answer as you saying, tell me the best product feature to build for this product, based on lowest effort, highest ROI and competitive advantage. You get a much different answer if you ask that question. And it's the difference between critical thinking and, ask a kind of medium answer, get a medium response. Mm. And I think that, and again, obviously when you get the response, you've got to evaluate it and then go through the loop to make sure that actually you're getting the best response through the interaction of the process. And I kind of feel that in the past, companies have evaluated personnel based on things like Myers-Briggs and other kind of testing. I kind of suspect that in the future we'll start to see people evaluating employees on critical thinking to understand that actually most employees now are going to be AI augmented or AI assisted employees. Therefore, I want to make sure that this person who the AI is going to buddy up with actually is smart enough to be working with the AI. And I definitely think that is something that will start to come through. But that was a sidebar to what you originally.
I love it. I mean, what you've just basically said, if I could paraphrase, is it's no longer about, what you know effectively. It's about your ability to ask well-formed questions,
Exactly.
which is a very different, I would submit that other than in the field of philosophy, I don't think we're teaching university students how to ask great questions.
I don't think we are. And I think where you see that a lot of the people who are good at AI are actually come out of the consultative space because they're kind of trained to think that way when they go through their training. So some of these guys in corporate finance, etc., they get really good value from AI. But back to your question, I think from an innovation perspective, I think the biggest opportunity for AI to have a real impact is probably to accelerate scientific breakthroughs. And again, I'm thinking about climate change, new drugs, ability to leverage it to do disease eradication, things that we could really, it could really shine on because it is kind of good at those type of things anyway. I think the challenge, long term, I'm not going to go down the AGI route because I think we're a long way away from that. But I think the real challenge is going to be ensuring that the AI systems don't have bias. I know that's going to be really difficult. And if you look at some of the things that have come out recently in the US, particularly the kind of those federal statements that came out about making sure that systems that deal with federal contracts don't have bias, it's kind of really hard, as you know. You know how AI foundational models are trained. They're trained on public internet information. That public internet information has bias.
Let's be clear, Jim. People are biased.
Yeah, people are biased, exactly. So why would you expect an AI system not to be?
It's absurd to think you can make that anything other than.
Yeah, I think the only way you'd get around that is if you trained your own foundational model and you give it to the suppliers and said, this is what we want you to use.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the challenge will be making sure that, the AI systems are kind of aligned with our values and that they remain broadly beneficial to society as they become more capable. And that's got obviously lots of undertones from, AI replacing jobs to, AI currently being used in warfare, which is, horrendous. I think those challenges will remain. And I think the other challenge will be as these foundational models have bigger moats to be able to build them, you'll have fewer and fewer countries actually have those models. And I think even now I read an article in the New York Times that said actually there's only like 16 countries right now who have the ability to have the largest foundational models. And it makes you wonder whether we're going through a rethinking of, geopolitical alignment, based on countries who have access to AI. And you're already seeing now, for example, workers in some of the nations that don't have AI changing their working patterns so that they can get access to AI when the rest of us are sleeping. So I think there's a lot of challenges around what's going to happen in the future. And I didn't even touch upon power, water, and all the things that you kind of need to keep AI running and train the next foundational models.
Hey, I want to wrap up with a little bit of advice. Put your CEO hat back on firmly. You're talking to other CEOs who are maybe not quite so technical as you, and they're saying, look, we want to go down the AI path. My IT guys are excited. My product guys are really excited. We want to get started. What's your advice to them on how they should be? What are there sort of 2 or 3 sort of guiding principles or takeaways you give them before they get started?
High level, 10,000 feet. Understand your data. Understand where it is. Understand your data taxonomy, invest in classification, understand your use cases and your data flows. Think about whether they're really AI use cases at all. Could they be API or microservices architectures? And if you keep it in stages like that, you'll end up in a good place. That's all I can say.
Jim, thank you so much. If people are interested in learning more about you, your work, or the topic of data and AI, where can they go to learn more?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So just, Jim Liddle on LinkedIn, you'll find I normally do 1 or 2 posts a day for my sins. So you can always find me there.
I wish I could keep up with your level of production. That's brilliant. Thanks so much, mate. Well, that is a wrap. So here's the question: is good data just an aspirational goal, or is it something you can get done today? Would love to hear your thoughts. So drop them into the comments section below, or hit up Cloudera on LinkedIn using the handle @Cloudera with your thoughts. Thanks again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast, and thank you all for listening in. We'll see you all next week.